Eastern Director of Athletics Lori Runksmeier, who is with us to provide an update on the state of athletics as we approach the one-year anniversary of COVID-19. Welcome, Lori.
Hi there.
It's been a very difficult year for everyone involved, administrators, athletes, coaches, and staff. Would that be a major understatement?
I think that would be a major understatement, yes.
As we head toward mid-February, what is the status of spring sports? Are you optimistic that the spring sports season can be conducted close to pre-pandemic levels?
I think a lot of it, hopefully, will look like what things looked like 2 years ago. I think there might be some differences with who we play outside of conference, so maybe that means more conference opponents. So it might be the kind of thing where we play the same team more often than we're used to playing them in one season.
Were there any manuals, tutorials, or classes that could have prepared college presidents, athletic directors, athletic trainers, or coaches to navigate this pandemic?
I don't really think so, especially since it kept rolling out in ways that maybe we weren't necessarily really thinking a year ago that it was going to end up like that. There wasn't a flattening of the curve that we heard about, last March. There wasn't even really valleys, and it certainly wasn't gone by the fall or anything. So I think as things kept rolling, there was just more and more information that we weren't guessing when March started.
Which are some of the groups that need to be consulted before you make decisions that relate to COVID?
Well, Eastern's part of the Connecticut System Office, so Central, Southern, Western, and us all have athletics. So there's a certain amount of weigh-in from the System Office. Most of the decisions here would come from the vice presidential level. And I have to say, both the Vice President of Student Affairs, Walter Diaz, and President Nunez have been great. They've been so supportive of the student athletes, and they've really made my job easier through this whole thing.
In a constantly changing landscape, how difficult has COVID made the recruiting process and practice and game planning for our coaches?
I think it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Right now, recruiting numbers seem to be good. Certainly, coaches wouldn't have had any experiences to see those athletes as what they're used to. I think it's also going to be interesting to see the impact of the extra year of eligibility that everybody's getting and how that plays out on recruiting, because we're looking at least 1, maybe 2 years of extra classes on any roster. So I think those are answers that we don't really have yet. And as far as practice and games, I really think our coaches have done a good job in trying to make the experience that we can have feel as normal as they can make it feel.
Definitely. Given the fact that men's basketball only has 16 players and has had trouble playing against outside competition, how do you think the larger teams will be able to handle the spring season?
Some of that's impacted by the different standards that the NCAA has set for basketball. So the NCAA, unless you could totally pod a basketball team, which would mean 8 guys practicing, being together just on their own, and a different 8 guys doing the same thing, and the two teams would never see each other, the whole team gets shut down. That's not true for other sports. So on other sports, let's say that a men's lacrosse player tests positive this spring. We'll go into normal contact tracing by CDC standards to try to figure out who's a close contact. So there's a possibility that the entire men's lacrosse team doesn't have to get shut down. So I think that's one thing that hopefully will make the spring play out a little differently. I think the piece that maybe I wasn't ready enough for with hoops was it certainly isn't just whether or not we have a positive player. We've lost more games because somebody on another team tested positive. So I think that's a piece that will continue. You just have to be so much more flexible than we've had to be in the past, and be ready to play. Any day that you can put a game in, you got to be ready to play.
Eastern has been trying hard to have men's basketball and swimming seasons this winter, but has faced many obstacles. In your mind, is it still an option at this point to cancel the winter seasons and focus on the spring?
I think we're going to make it. We have, arguably 2, maybe 3 weeks left. Swimming maybe longer. Maybe swimming will extend their season because of obstacles that opponents have had. Swimming has a little bit of a leg up because they can do virtual races. Not the same, obviously, but at least a race. So I feel like we're going to be okay, but again, if I've learned anything over the course of the last year, it's that we don't really know anything at all.
Yeah. How are the student athletes staying involved during these times?
It appears to me like they are doing their best to help each other out and keep each other propped up. They're still, working out in the weight room and practicing and everything else. I get a sense that everybody's grateful for any little piece of physical activity and competition that they can have.
Or even just being here in general.
Exactly.
What precautions are Eastern Athletics taking in order to keep the cases low?
We're going to test a lot more this spring because we're competing than we did in the fall. In the fall, we tested at the same level that the school was testing at. The school's increased testing for this spring for students, so every athlete's going to get tested at least every week. So that's one thing. We continue to try to work with the athletes on what social distancing looks like, what quarantining looks like, what good choices look like. I've also learned that whether or not you get COVID isn't necessarily anybody's fault.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to just happen, and there's no rhyme or reason. So we're going to do our best with the hand washing and the hand sanitizing and not sharing water bottles and all of that stuff. I think it's tricky. I think athletes are social animals. You don't just play because you want to be a better basketball player. You play because you like the people on your team and you want to be around them. So I think it does make it tricky. It just does.
What is the protocol if someone on a team tests positive?
So same as anybody testing positive. We make a phone call to the head contact tracer on campus. The student who tests positive will go into isolation, which lasts 10 days, and then our contact tracers make phone calls to figure out who hit the CDC levels of, the 15 minutes over a 24-hour period, masked or unmasked, blah, 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 all of that, and those people go into quarantine.
What kind of restrictions are there on organized practices?
So we're asking everybody to be masked as much as you can. If you're not actively practicing, wear a mask. If you're on the sideline, same as with a game. You should be wearing your mask. If you're not in the game, wear your mask at halftime. I think the more masking, the better. I think that we have the QR codes around the building to check in and make sure that you haven't had any symptoms today. I think that's really huge that we can't lose sight of. If you don't feel well, just stay away for a day or so until you can figure out what it was. Because there's so many symptoms to COVID that, I know I've talked to people, I just thought I had allergies. And that's the kind of thing that I think we have to make sure we watch for as well.
Compared to September, have those restrictions got loose or tighter?
I think they're about the same.
How are these potential day of decisions affecting communication? Meaning, someone has a game in 4 hours and a teammate or coach on one of the teams tests positive right before the game.
Well, you probably have to ask Mr. Molta how the it's tricky. Honestly, in a way, I try not to tell everybody until I actually know something, because it feels like it just happened yesterday. As soon as I send the email that says our game time is this and this, the opposing team had to change the game time because of their test schedule. So it's almost like everything has to be by the seat of your pants, because if you try to plan it out ahead of time, it's going to get changed 3 times and it just gets more confusing than it ever would have been. I think that's the biggest deal with communication, is that everybody's probably overloaded with emails from me and changes, and it's a lot. It's just a lot of changes.
Yeah, I bet. How will the shortened seasons affect eligibility?
Not at all. The NCAA made a call a long time ago, last summer, that basically, in the fall, but basically this year isn't gonna count for anybody with semesters or seasons of eligibility. And the idea is simple. You shouldn't feel, if you try to have a season and you only get in 4 games, you shouldn't have lost an entire year. And also, I think it doesn't put any pressure on people not to come to school. I don't feel safe playing, I don't feel comfortable playing, so I wanna save my semester. Well, you don't have to worry about that. You can come, you can be a full-time student and get your master's and play that extra year if you want to.
At this point, do you see spectators being allowed at outdoor or indoor athletic events?
We're working on it. This weekend, we're gonna have a small crowd of Eastern students only that will be coming to our non-conference basketball games. We're trying to figure out some protocol for the outdoor games to figure out how we can make it work. I think we saw at the Super Bowl that it's one thing to say you can let people in, maybe another to actually enforce social distancing. So that's the kind of stuff that we don't have a hard no, but it's tough to find real answers because it's tough to figure out how we can really logistically do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do the teams traveling out of state need to follow COVID restrictions, given that they will be there masked for less than 24 hours?
No, I think stuff would change. We don't plan on any overnights or the more than 24-hour thing, obviously, unless, NCAA tournament or LEC tournament would come into play, that kind of deal. So that'll help that we're really just going places and turning around and coming home, and maybe that team comes down here the next day and plays. But that helps the quarantine piece.
How are teams distancing themselves during travel?
Buses are only going to be half full. So everybody's getting a 56-passenger van, and the most people that can be on any one of those buses, or 56-passenger bus, is going to be 28. So if you can map it out with the 6 feet around, masks have to be worn the whole time you're on the bus. And we're really trying to limit, there aren't going to be any team buffets after the games. That's just a thing that's not going to happen this year.
Are sports center facilities open for the general student population?
Yeah, on a limited basis. We've had some cuts to student employment money because of, obviously, the budget's tight at Eastern. So we're still trying to figure out if there's a way we can get the basketball gym open more for open gym. The weight room's open from 1 to 7, Monday through Friday. The gym's open as much as we can get it open. The pool's open for student use. So it's here, it's open, maybe not as open as people want it to be, but again, everything, it's all trickles down. There's gotta be cleaning and mitigation and all of that other kind of stuff, so it's a bigger endeavor than just let's open the place and have a free-for-all.
Yeah. Since athletics have been more or less shut down since last March, has the money saved on transportation, meals, officials, event staff, etc., been saved or just redirected to other areas like implementing safety protocols?
Yeah, I would say more on the redirected. I think, again, the school's been really supportive, so for this spring, if we have games, we're going to be able to get to them. Everybody's going to be able to eat. We're going to be able to have refs, but there isn't any extra money for gear or practice clothes or things like that. But we're still going to be funded for the necessities, and that's where we're at for this year.
Since there are currently have been more people vaccinated than there are positive cases, are you optimistic that the fall season of 2021 will return back to normal?
I've been optimistic the whole time. So, yeah, I mean, I think so. I feel that I've heard from the NCAA and just other institutions that the plan is to move forward with at least thinking fall is going to be regular. And Eastern right now is planning on-ground regular classes in the fall. So, boy, I sure hope so. Not getting any younger. Don't know if I can do another year of this.
And do you think that COVID vaccinations will become mandatory for students next year?
So I actually just heard about, so the deal with COVID vaccinations being mandatory, and the reason that right now they aren't is because of the the vaccination process was faster than a usual vaccination process. So the government can't make a mandatory yet because it hasn't gone through the usual years-long process of getting a vaccine approved. My guess is when we get through that vaccine approval process, there'll be a discussion about whether or not it has to be mandatory like meningitis, or if it ends up being like the flu vaccine.
Yeah. And then my last question for you is, what are some things that everyone at the athletic department might have learned from the pandemic that might be beneficial in planning and implementing in the future?
I think that we really have all learned that we need to be more flexible and ready to fly by the seat of our pants. I hope we've also learned in a certain way that it's important to be as patient with each other as we can be. Everybody's been at different places in this throughout all of this. And on any given day, there's somebody that's being impacted in ways that I don't have any idea that they're being impacted. So I think that's one thing. I also think it's made me realize how important physical activity and sport is to all of our mental health. Obviously the student athletes, but to the coaches and me as well. And so hopefully once we get through this thing, we can take a step back and try to figure out how we can make participation and competition as mentally hopeful as we can, because I think coming out of this might be as tricky as the past year that we've been in. So I think we're going to have to at some point turn our focus to how we're going to make things better getting out of this so that we're not all traumatized forever.
Lori, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.